Welcome to this presentation on digitisation and copyright for teaching materials. My name is Kayla Barlow. I'm from the e-learning team in the Faculty of Engineering and Physical Sciences.
My name is Martin Snelling. I'm the Resource Delivery Manager in the University of Manchester Library with responsibility for copyright.
Thank you for taking the time for this presentation. In return, we'll provide advice about copyright and digitisation that could save you time and money. We'll explain about copyright and digitisation and how you can get library staff to prepare resources for you. You'll see useful resources to help you work with copyright material, whether for teaching, research, or a broader public audience. We'll answer common questions from academics and leave you with 3 key messages to make sure your use of materials is lawful, complies with licence requirements, and is time effective.
Digitisation is simply the process by which a print journal article or a book chapter is turned into an electronic resource. Another example would be a scanned graph from a book embedded into a PowerPoint slide.
Copyright gives the creator of an original work exclusive rights to control and profit from it. It is a form of intellectual property, like the patent and trademark. Copyright automatically arises in the UK and many other countries, so you don't have to register for copyright, and you're not required to mark your work with the copyright symbol. Copyright protects material, generally for the creator's lifetime plus a further 70 years, although this varies according to the type of work. After copyright expires, work is said to be in the public domain, and using such work does not infringe copyright. Copyright work may be licensed so that others can use it without the risk of being sued by the copyright holder. We'll highlight key licenses during this presentation. For one of these licenses, the university has the Comprehensive Copyright Licensing Agency, or CLA, license. This allows us to produce scans, providing we keep to the rules. For example, no more than 1 article from an issue of a journal per module, and it additionally allows us to make copies of digitally born documents. If you infringe copyright, you can be held individually liable. In other words, you could be sued by the copyright holder. Sticking to copyright rules is a way of showing respect for other people's work, in the way that you would want them to show respect for your own. It also sets a good example for students and reinforces the guidance that we give them about avoiding plagiarism, because in most cases, you will have to credit the sources for work that you use. Which teaching materials are affected by copyright? Well, firstly, what do we mean by teaching materials? They are materials that are mainly designed to be used or accessed by students for any course of study they are following. Importantly, teaching materials aren't just the slides that you use in a lecture or your lecturer's notes. Teaching materials are also examples, quizzes, equipment, demonstration models, audio-visual materials, and any electronic resources that you may provide for your students. Any of these materials could be protected by copyright. What kind of materials could include copyrighted work? Some of the most common types of work that could be protected by copyright are audio, images, software, text, and video. As we mentioned earlier, the protection varies according to the type of work, so let's look briefly at what we need to consider for each of these. Starting with audio, recorded or live music can be played for educational purposes as long as the audience is only students. You can also use podcasts. They have an implied license as you're allowed to download them. Remember, media shift is not permitted. For example, you're not allowed to rip a CD to MP3.
Many images found on the web are copyright, so it's best to seek permission before reusing them. The same applies to images from printed books or journals. If you scan the images yourself, please inform the library so that the details can be included in the annual return to the CLA. The library already makes several image banks available through the library website.
Software is protected by copyright. This includes fonts, and using a font without having the right license is a form of software piracy. Copyleft licenses originated for use with software. These licenses use copyright law to enforce their terms. Copyleft licenses such as the GNU General Public License, allow free use and modification of work. They also require all modified versions to be released under the same license. This requirement that any derived works are given the same freedom as the original work is called share alike. Share alike as a term was originally used by the Creative Commons project. Some share alike licenses impose additional restrictions, such as preventing commercial use. Creative Commons now has 6 copyright licenses to allow creators to communicate which rights they reserve and which rights they waive in their work. You can search online for content to share, use and modify under Creative Commons licenses. Open educational resources are released under a range of different licenses. They are digital teaching materials that have been licensed to allow them to be reused for teaching, learning, research, and more. Open educational resources include full courses, course materials, modules, textbooks, streaming videos, tests, software, and any other tools, materials, or techniques used to support access to knowledge. Examples of this include MIT OpenCourseWare, Khan Academy, Bloomsbury Academic, Merlot, and Peer-to-Peer University. Copyright protects both original literary works and typographical arrangements of published editions. Although you or the university originally held the copyright for your creation, the copyright for books that you have published has probably transferred to the publisher. It might be possible to negotiate the copyright agreement with your publisher. This happens more typically with journals, and where funding for the original research demands that your publications are then freely available. You can check your publishing agreement or contract to confirm what license you have, if any, to use this material in addition to what is permitted through the CLA license. Film, video, DVD, broadcast or cable programs can be shown to students for the purposes of instruction under the Educational Recording Agency's licensing scheme. This license allows recording from broadcasts made in the UK and electronic communication of these recordings within an educational establishment. Please note that BBC iPlayer content can be shown in a lecture but cannot be shown online. Open University broadcasts are also available, but they have a separate license. Contact the Media Centre, who administer the license, to arrange to show broadcasts.
The University Library started to digitise on a large scale in 2009, when the Digitisation team was established. Requests come in from the staff portal and are normally processed within 10 working days. Results from both the National Student Survey and from module feedback show that students claim they cannot gain access to traditional printed materials, and digitisation is a means to put that right. For academic staff, the process is relatively simple. Once a scan has been requested, the library scanning team do all the work by checking copyright, creating the PDF file, and then sending a link for that file to the original requester, which should then be embedded into the reading list and/or Blackboard. This normally takes less than 10 days. By using the library's digitisation service, it helps the university to stay compliant with the terms of the CLA license. We ensure that students get a high-quality scan, and only students registered on the module get to see the scanned document associated with that module. More importantly, we help to free up academic staff from doing what is essentially an administrative task. Though it is preferable for library staff to do the scanning, academic staff can do their own, providing that they stick to a few basic rules. For example, no more than one chapter from a book. The approved cover sheet must be attached. The library should be informed of all the details of the scan using the web form. And please check out the Good Practice Guide for Academics on the CLA website first. As you can see, the number of scanned documents reported to the CLA is increasing steadily year on year. The library's aim is to add several thousand documents each year, which can be reused in following years. The chart shows that staff from the Faculty of Humanities are the most active in requesting digitisation, but the service is open to all and is completely free.
We saw earlier that there are different licenses and restrictions for different types of work. So what material from others can you use and in which context? Here's a summary to highlight the key permissions and restrictions. We also have a guide to potential sources of appropriately licensed content on the Teaching Innovations website. In lectures or seminars, where only registered students are present, you have the most freedom. You can use live music, CDs, DVDs, streamed audio, for example, BBC Listen Again, and BBC iPlayer content. For example, one source of images that can be used in lectures is CERN. Whatever the teaching environment, you can't use material that isn't credited, or material that you have modified, unless the license gives you permission otherwise. In Blackboard, you can use something called Box of Broadcasts, affectionately known as Bob, to make broadcasts available to your students. This includes BBC broadcasts, and also other UK broadcast programmes, as this is available under the ERA Plus license. Within Blackboard, you can't use content from CDs, videos, DVDs, streamed audio, or BBC iPlayer. Also, don't use material that you haven't credited, or that you have modified, unless you have permission. If you're stuck without permission to use key material in Blackboard, you can still provide links so that you avoid infringing copyright, and your students can access the material. Where the audience is not limited to students registered on a particular course, for example, a public lecture, a research presentation, or a website without access restrictions, the choice of material is more limited. Some Creative Commons licensed material, including open educational resources, and share-alike content can be used. For example, most NASA audio, video, and images can be used in this context. You can't use CDs, videos, DVDs, streamed audio, BBC iPlayer, or Box of Broadcast recordings for a wider audience. And again, don't use any material that isn't credited or that you have modified without permission. Here are the most common questions that academics ask about copyright and teaching materials, and the answers.
Surely the university has a license that covers all of these purposes?
Well, no, there's no blanket license available for institutions that would permit all uses. We are given limited uses under the Copyright Licensing Agency (CLA) license for print material, and the ERA license provides limited use of broadcasts. There's a further license for open university broadcasts, and these are all specific to education. More generally, we can take advantage of share-alike licensed material, Creative Commons licensed material, and open educational resources. It's important to check which license applies and what limitations there are for how the material can be used. To help you reuse the material in future, keep a record of where you found it and its license.
Surely there are exemptions for education.
Not quite. There is a fair dealing exemption for copyright, which goes part of the way, but it doesn't give us a blanket exemption. Fair dealing means that you can copy a certain amount of material, but it has to be used fairly and with acknowledgement for the purposes of non-commercial research, private study, criticism, or review. There is also an exemption for examinations. So this isn't a general exemption for all academic purposes. Make sure you do have the necessary permissions for the material you want to use. Relying on this exemption is not enough.
But I'm only using a clip, so surely that's fine.
Again, under the fair dealing exemption, copyright is not infringed if the amount of copying is insubstantial. However, it is difficult to determine what insubstantial means. It could be just a few words. So again, make sure you have the necessary permissions to avoid any infringement.
It's my own work. That must be fine.
Well, if it's work that you've completed for the university, that's fine to use. But if you've had work published, then you will need to check your publishing agreement. You may not be able to use the material that you have published in the way that you think.
I've got lots of images that I've saved already. How do I find the source and check the copyright permissions?
Check the properties of the image files to see if this gives you the information you need. From this, you might be able to find an ID or a name that you can put in a search engine. Alternatively, there are several websites, one example being TinEye for reverse image searches. This helps not only to find the source of an image, but also to check if the image you have is actually a composite made up of other images that might each have different copyright restrictions. Links for these are in the guidance.
If you are seeking further guidance on copyright, use any of the following: the library web pages, the copyright guide, or by calling the library in person. An element of copyright information and guidance is included in the new academics program, particularly that run by the Faculty of Humanities, something we're trying to roll out to other faculties as well. You can also consult your faculty e-learning team.
The Teaching Innovations website from the Faculty of Engineering and Physical Sciences has specific guidance on copyright in teaching materials and links to useful resources for where to find copyright-free and licensed material. If you're unsure, contact the Virtual Service Desk and they can point you in the right direction. To summarize, in this presentation, we've seen that copyright automatically applies to work, and various licenses allow us to use this material in different ways. We've explained that copyright is important because you can be held individually liable for any infringement, and that any work that isn't your own, whatever the format, could be protected by copyright. There's a process for digitisation at the University of Manchester, so as an academic you don't have to do your own. Simply fill in the request for the library and they will do all the work for you. If you do digitise materials yourself, report it to the library to make sure that we keep to our CLA licence requirements. Remember, licences only permit material to be used in certain environments, typically limited to registered students on a particular course. So you must check the licence or permission for any material that you want to use. We've looked at the common questions that academics ask about copyright and teaching materials. The key points to remember are that the university doesn't have a blanket licence for copyright material. You can't rely on exemptions for education or for insubstantial copying. Remember, material that you have produced for the university is fine for you to reuse in your teaching materials, but your published work may not be. You will need to check with the publisher. If you need to check an image file, you can use reverse image searches to find where that material originated and if it is a composite image. We've also highlighted key places you can go to find further guidance about copyright or digitisation, including the library and the Teaching Innovations websites. There are 3 key messages to take away from this presentation about copyright, digitisation and teaching materials. Firstly, make sure the license for the materials you want to use gives permission for the way that you want to use them. Secondly, credit your sources and don't modify anything without permission. Thirdly, use the guidance, both from the library and from the Teaching Innovations website. Follow these 3 points to make sure that your use of materials is lawful, complies with license requirements, and is time effective. Thank you.
We would like to acknowledge the support of the University of Manchester Library, the e-learning team in the Faculty of Engineering and Physical Sciences, and the Office of the General Counsel in preparing this presentation.